What's up guys, in today's video we're going to be taking a deep dive into the fight between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno for a fourth time. Yes, these guys have previously fought 3 times before, which is great news for us because we can look at their previous 3 fights and see how those matchups went to give us a pretty good indication of how this 4th fight at UFC 283 is likely to play out this weekend. So I hope that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. But as always, if you are going to be betting this fight this weekend, remember to gamble responsibly and do your own research, because a matchup like this, there's a lot of different variables, there's a lot to think about and a lot of different ways in which it could play out. And of course, the end result of their previous 3 fights shows this, because the first time Figueiredo and Moreno fought, we can see the matchup ended in a draw. The second time they fought, of course, Brandon Moreno picked up the win, and then most recently Deiveson Figueiredo was able to pick up a unanimous decision win over Brandon Moreno, although it is worth noting that that fight was razor close, could quite easily have ended in a split decision. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that if you shop around, you could pretty much bet both guys at the same odds, with both of them being in that dead even money odds range. So if we put even money odds into the implied probability calculator, we can see that you can bet both guys at pretty much odds of around 1.91, which is minus 110, for an implied probability of 52%. So in the eyes of the bookies, this is a 50-50 fight. And it's difficult to disagree with that when you take into consideration the fact that these guys have fought 3 times already, and every single time they fought, we got a different outcome. And because of that, it's pretty much impossible to feel confident on either side here, because history has shown us when these 2 guys compete, anything can happen. But of course, their past fights do give us some valuable information that we can use to try and predict the most likely outcome of the matchup this weekend. So before we get into talking about how these 2 match up from a stylistic point of view, I want to go over a few X factors which I think could have a pretty big impact on the outcome of this matchup. But before I do that, I would just like to ask you, if you appreciate these breakdown videos, if you get a lot of value out of them, please hit the like button below and also subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me to grow the channel and give a boost to these videos, and so you'd be doing me a big favor if you were to hit the like button and subscribe. But for now, back into the breakdown. So the first X factor that I want to talk about is something that I've kind of touched on in the other breakdown videos for UFC 283, but I really feel that home advantage is something that can have a big influence on this matchup in particular. So where we've got to have home advantage in mind for a lot of the other fights on this card, with a fight like this, which is likely to be razor close, home advantage really has to form quite a big part of our decision making on how this matchup is likely to play out. Because when you look at the most recent fight between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno, I mean, if we bring up MMA decisions, we can see that if we go to how the media scored the fight, we can see that most people did score the fight for Figueiredo, but there were a few people that scored the fight for Moreno, and I personally feel the fight was razor close. I think it could have gone either way. This is pretty significant because we know home advantage is absolutely huge in Brazil when Brazilian fighters face non-Brazilian fighters. And we can quantify this with a statistic that Brazilian fighters win around 65% of the time when they're facing non-Brazilians on UFC cards in Brazil. One of the main reasons why home advantage is so huge in Brazil is because the crowd really get behind the Brazilian fighters. So that gives the Brazilian fighters a lift. They feed off the energy of the crowd. But on top of that, we know that judges are also influenced by the crowd, because we know exactly what it's going to be like on Saturday night. Every time Figueiredo has a tiny little bit of success, every single time he lands a big clubbing power shot or lands a takedown or has any success in the octagon, the crowd are going to go crazy. And that can mislead judges into thinking Figueiredo is perhaps doing better than he actually is. Whereas when Moreno has any kind of success in the octagon, maybe Moreno lands a takedown or lands a nice combination, he's not going to have that same pop from the crowd, so it's not going to influence the judges as strongly. So home advantage in a fight like this is absolutely massive, because if we look at the last fight between Figueiredo and Moreno and accept that there's a pretty good chance that this fourth fight is going to be just as close and just as competitive, now that this matchup is taking place in Brazil, where Figueiredo will have home advantage, that makes it really difficult for Moreno to win a decision. I feel in order for Moreno to win this fight, he's going to have to finish Figueiredo, which will not be easy because of how difficult Figueiredo is to finish, right? How tough he is. I know Moreno has finished him in the past, but didn't really come close to finishing him in the most recent fight. So twice these guys, or 3 times these guys have fought, and throughout the 3 times the fight went, the full 25 minutes. So we can't say it's all that likely Moreno's going to be able to finish Figueiredo. And if he doesn't finish Figueiredo, I really feel like Moreno is going to have to dominate Figueiredo to the point where the judges can't possibly screw the decision up. And because of how tough and well-rounded Figueiredo is, that is definitely not going to be an easy thing to do. So for me, home advantage is a huge factor to take into consideration if you're betting this fight this weekend. Now, in terms of their size and their age, a couple of other things we focus on a lot. We can see that Figueiredo is 35 years old, 5'5", with a 68-inch reach, while Moreno is 29 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach. So we can see Moreno is 6 years younger than Figueiredo, which definitely gives him an edge. At 29 years old, Moreno should still be making big improvements from fight to fight, whereas at 35 years old, you would expect Figueiredo to have more plateaued. You wouldn't expect to see any major improvements from Figueiredo in his mid-30s. He's at that stage in his career where, if anything, he would start to be declining from fight to fight, especially in the lighter weight classes like the flyweight division, where fighters tend to decline earlier in their career than fighters in the heavier weight classes. 35 years old for a heavyweight, it's not that old, but 35 years old for a flyweight, pretty damn old. So Figueiredo is approaching the tail end of his career, but of course he still looks fantastic and hasn't really shown any signs of decline yet. But obviously age does give Moreno a bit of an advantage here. Now, in terms of size, we can see Moreno has a couple of inches longer reach. He's a little bit taller than Figueiredo as well, but both these guys have got very different body types, and there are strengths and weaknesses to both body types. So when you look at Moreno, he's longer, he's leaner, he's taller, which means he's got better cardio, he can fight at a higher pace, and he can fight a bit longer as well. Whereas Figueiredo at 5'5" is more compact, more muscular, and as a result he's able to generate a lot more power and land much harder, more impactful shots than Moreno. So just because Moreno is a little bit longer, a little bit taller than Figueiredo, I wouldn't say that's necessarily an advantage. I think both guys use their body types quite well. Now, what is very interesting about the matchup between these two, and the reason why I feel this is such an interesting fight, is that I believe they've both lost against one another for exactly the same reason. And let me explain a little bit more what I mean by that. So if you look at Deiveson Figueiredo, the second time he fought Brandon Moreno, if we're being brutally honest, he got absolutely destroyed. Gassed out very quickly, was just overwhelmed by Moreno, second best, standing up and on the ground. He just couldn't live with Moreno. Moreno absolutely destroyed him in that fight. And I feel a big part of the reason why that happened is because Figueiredo started to believe his own hype and feel himself a little bit too much. Within my community, we have this thing that we talk about where successful fighters or dominant champions or rising stars in the UFC reach a point in their career where they've got some notoriety, they've made some cash, and you can start to see their personality change. and you can start to see them affected in many ways by their new fortune. And so when you start to see a fighter who, when they first came into the UFC, was this young, hungry, mean, aggressive, motivated, nasty bull, suddenly start to show up to press conferences in like fancy sunglasses and Gucci tracksuits and big gold chains. You know, I remember watching Kamaru Usman, you know, turn up at the arena for one of his title fights wearing a giant fur coat. Like that only tends to happen when a fighter really starts to feel themselves a little bit, believe their own hype, and start to feel they're invincible. You know, it's like the old boxing expression. It's hard to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning and do road work when you're sleeping in satin sheets. And this is a phenomenon that affects a lot of guys that start to do very well in the sport, make some money, and become dominant champions. So when Figueiredo fought Moreno for the second time, I think he was at that stage in his career where he felt he was invincible. He believed his own hype. He didn't take Moreno all that seriously, didn't show up in the best shape against Moreno in the second fight, and got out-grappled, outstruck, and eventually finished in round 3 when he became too tired to defend himself. Because Figueiredo was this guy that was enjoying the fruits of his labour, walking around with big gold chains, Gucci tracksuits, feeling himself, while Moreno was in the gym every day, this young, hungry, aggressive bull that knew based on how their first fight played out that if he just fought a little bit smarter, worked a little bit harder, he could go one step further, get the job done, and beat Figueiredo in the rematch. And that's exactly what happened. Moreno looked absolutely incredible and totally destroyed Figueiredo in that second matchup. But then in the third fight, the roles were completely reversed. After suffering that loss, Figueiredo realised something needed to change. He went and trained with Henry Cejudo, and he came into that third fight in much better shape, much more focused, with a game plan and a strategy specifically tailored towards giving him the best chance of beating Brandon Moreno. I think it was the best performance of Figueiredo's career. He fought really, really smart. Throughout Figueiredo's career, one of his biggest weaknesses is that he has come out the gate very aggressively early and just looked to overwhelm guys with his physicality, his presence, and his power. But he realised against a tough Mexican like Moreno, who's very durable, very well-rounded, that could easily go 25 hard minutes, he wasn't going to be able to go hard and get Moreno out there early. So he had to develop a game plan and strategy that enabled him to both pace himself over the 5 rounds and score enough points to beat Moreno. And that's exactly what he did with the help of Cejudo. He looked absolutely brilliant. But in that third fight, there were definitely roles reversed, where when you look at Moreno during that fight week in the press conference, he was also almost dismissive of Figueiredo's chances of winning. He was supremely confident to the point of being almost cocky. And then on fight night, Moreno just didn't look anywhere near as good as he did in the previous fight, that second fight. The thing that made Moreno one of the most formidable flyweights in the division to face, one of the toughest challenges at flyweight, was his work rate. Moreno, with that Latin American gas tank, that Mexican blood, he was a guy that could really put it on you and force you to work extremely hard, both standing up and on the ground, for 25 minutes. He could grapple hard and chain wrestle non-stop for 5 rounds, and he could also chip away at you and throw a super high volume of strikes at you for 5 rounds as well. And that made him very difficult to deal with, especially for a guy like Figueiredo that did have a tendency to slow down. We know that the harder you make Figueiredo work, the faster he gasses, because he's a big, explosive, athletic power fighter, power puncher. When he grapples, he commits a lot of energy to it. When he throws big power punches, he commits a lot of energy to it as well. So the key to beating Figueiredo is quite simply just to make him work. And it's going to be difficult to compete with him early because he's excellent, and when he's fresh, he's a very good grappler, very good striker. But the more you make him work, the less effective he becomes. And that's why, in many ways, Moreno has the skill set to be kryptonite for someone like Deiveson Figueiredo, because Moreno can force Figueiredo to fight at a pace that genetically he just isn't capable of fighting at. The mistake Moreno made in the third fight was that he tried to beat Figueiredo at his own game. So it was Moreno's work rate that gave him the edge in the second fight. He constantly attacked Figueiredo with range-finding kicks, leg kicks, jabs, takedown attempts. Moreno in that second fight did such a good job of mixing up his striking and grappling to always keep Figueiredo guessing, and he just overwhelmed him with a barrage of strikes. He constantly forced Figueiredo to engage and work and exert energy. And that's why it was such a dominant win for Moreno, because Figueiredo could not keep up with Moreno in that second fight. But in the third fight, like I say, Moreno made the mistake of trying to beat Figueiredo at his own game. He started to feel himself a little bit too much, and he went away from the volume striking that got him to the dance. He stopped throwing leg kicks. He stopped throwing jabs. And if you go back and watch that second fight, if you go back and watch that third fight, the most recent fight, Moreno was really trying very hard to knock Figueiredo out. He kept getting into these big exchanges. Moreno wanted to prove a point in that third matchup that he could go toe-to-toe with Figueiredo and knock him out. And what actually happened was, in all of this, because he kept loading up and getting into those big exchanges and looked to land that big power punch, he ended up dropping rounds, not making Figueiredo work as hard as he should have done, and ultimately losing the fight. And the reason why that happened was, first of all, it's like Chael Sonnen says, when you try and win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision. When Moreno was getting into these big exchanges, he was giving Figueiredo opportunities to win those exchanges and land bigger shots, and at times that's what happened. Figueiredo even dropped Moreno a couple times in the fight. On top of that, because Moreno was just looking to load up and land that big power shot, he wasn't throwing with the same volume. He wasn't systematically breaking Figueiredo down with the leg kicks, the body work, the jabs. On top of that, he just wasn't forcing Figueiredo to engage or work as hard as he did in the third fight, because he was just loading up on these big singular power strikes. But by not peppering Figueiredo with the volume, Figueiredo didn't have to open up an exchange as much. Moreno also didn't use anywhere near as much grappling as he could have done. We know Figueiredo is difficult to take down and hold down, but we also know if you shoot takedowns on a guy like Figueiredo, even if you don't get the takedown, just forcing him to exert energy to defend the takedown pays dividends. And that's, again, something that Moreno simply didn't do enough in the third fight. And so we're in an interesting situation here where I feel both guys have lost to one another through bad fight IQ, game planning, and decision making, as opposed to skills. If both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, I think Moreno wins 70 to 80% of the time. Simply because I think he's tough enough, has a good enough chin to take Figueiredo's best shots for the most part. Of course, anyone can be knocked out, but Moreno's pretty tough, pretty durable. And I think that Moreno can force Figueiredo to fight at a pace which Figueiredo just can't fight at. If Moreno comes into this matchup, grapples hard, throws a high volume of strikes, I think it's inevitable that at some point Figueiredo fades and Moreno takes over in a big way. The problem is, Moreno hasn't looked good in his last two fights. So if it hadn't been for his most recent fight against Kai Kara-France, right now breaking this matchup down, I would probably be saying something along the lines of Moreno made a mistake in his last fight against Figueiredo. He was loading up too much, trying to knock Figueiredo out, and basically abandoned the style that gave him so much success when he won the title the second time they ever fought. So Moreno's going to learn from that, and he's going to come into this fourth fight with a similar game plan and strategy to what he used in the second fight and get his title back. Probably be saying something along those lines. But if you go back and watch Moreno's recent matchup against Kai Kara-France, you'll see that he made a lot of the same mistakes against Kara France that he made in his most recent fight against Davis and Figueiredo, which is super interesting because we've previously seen Moreno completely dominate Kara France. Now, obviously, Kara France has probably improved a little bit since 2019, but Moreno should have as well. And if you go back and watch that fight from 2019, Moreno is so dominant. He's in total control. He takes control of the centre of the octagon, puts it on Kara France, and lights the poor guy up for 15 minutes. It's one of Moreno's best performances of his career. He looks absolutely outstanding. If you go watch his most recent fight against Kara France, he was actually losing before, scoring a finish out of nowhere by landing a kick to Kara France's body. But if you go back and watch it, Moreno was struggling to get his grappling game going. Kara France was inflicting more damage. He was outstriking Moreno. Moreno did not look good. So Moreno for me is an interesting case because, 29 years old with a lot of experience behind him. You'd expect him to be getting better from fight to fight and using that experience to grow and evolve. But since losing his title to Figueiredo, I actually feel... Actually, it's not appropriate for me to say that. Let's go back even further. Since winning his title against Figueiredo back in June 2021, I feel he's gone backwards by quite a decent margin. And his last fight against Kara France shows us that he probably hasn't fixed the issues that we saw in the most recent fight against Figueiredo. So this is an interesting matchup because you've got two guys in the even money odds range, and one of them, if both guys show up and perform to their best of their ability, I think wins pretty easily. I think Moreno is quite a lot better than Figueiredo everywhere. And the reason why I say that is because if the fight were to stay standing, we've already said Moreno has the capability of being a high volume striker where he throws a really diverse range of attacks, leg kicks, body kicks, brilliant boxing combinations. He can fight length, he's not bad defensively, and he's got the chin and toughness to go toe-to-toe with Figueiredo. Whereas Figueiredo has got this big power punching, single shot style of striking where he just loads up on big singular power strikes. But if he doesn't knock you out, it's very difficult for him to win decisions against guys like Moreno, because when guys like Moreno are at their best and they're throwing a high volume of strikes, it's impossible for someone like Figueiredo that's a single shot striker to keep up with that volume and outpoint them. So on the feet, Moreno has a huge advantage when he fights smart, when he throws a high volume. And when it comes to grappling, Moreno also has a huge advantage, because even though Figueiredo is a strong grappler with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Figueiredo is cursed in that the more he grapples, the faster he gets tired. So it doesn't really matter how these two match up skill for skill when it comes to grappling. If Moreno forces Figueiredo to grapple hard, Figueiredo will gas very bad, making him less effective, meaning Moreno can completely take over and dictate the pace of the fight and control the fight. So if both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, I heavily lean towards Brandon Moreno. I think he can dominate the fight standing up and on the ground. But the key to that outcome is Moreno forcing Figueiredo to work very hard early. And based on Moreno's past two fights, especially the Kara France fight, I'm not convinced Moreno is going to do that. For me, Moreno is a fighter that has shown some really bad fight IQ in his last couple of matchups. He seems to be overly tactical at the moment. It's almost like after winning the title, he suddenly wanted to become some Georges St. Pierre style master tactician in the octagon and kind of outthink the guys that he's facing without realizing that his biggest strength is what got him to the dance in the first place. It's his chin, his toughness, his cardio, and his work rate. And if he abandons those things, he loses that X factor, that edge that made him so special. And so from a betting point of view, with both these guys being in the even money odds range, it's a very, very difficult fight to bet. Because like I say, these guys have already fought 3 times and we got a completely different outcome every time they fought. And this is one of those matchups where I don't think it's going to be decided by who's the more skilled fighter, because I don't think there's any doubt that the more skilled fighter is Brandon Moreno. The outcome of fights are often decided by fight IQ, game planning, and strategy. And I feel Figueiredo, based on recent performances, is a lot stronger in that department. On top of that, he's got home advantage. And he's a tough fucker. And it ain't going to be easy for Moreno to get him out of there. And so this is a very, very tricky fight to call. I'm going to lean Brandon Moreno on the hope that he's learned from mistakes made in his previous 2 and goes back to his original style of just being a total buzzsaw, coming out the gate super hard, super aggressive, outworking Figueiredo, wearing him down and taking over in the second half of the fight. But I'm not confident in that outcome at all, because like I say, with home advantage on his side and with a smart game plan and strategy, Moreno's going to have to be at his absolute best to win this weekend. And I don't feel he's been anywhere near his best in his last 2. But that's how I see it going. How do you see it going? It's a very complex fight. Let me know in the comments below which way you lean towards. I don't feel confident either way here, so help me out in the comments below. But let's take a look at the over-under and the prop bets on this one. So, what's interesting about the odds on the over-under on this matchup is that it's the even money odds range, which I didn't expect, because if you look at their past fights, they fought 3 times, and on 2 out of the 3 times, the fight has gone to a decision. So I just thought that the odds on the fight to go to a decision would have been a bit steeper than this, with, you know, fight to go to a decision or not to go to a decision being roughly in that even money odds range. I think you'd be kind of foolish to bet on this fight to end inside the distance. These guys are very tough, very well rounded, very difficult to finish. They've previously fought to a decision twice. If you really want to bet the over under on this fight, seems like a no-brainer to bet on it to go to a decision again. Let me know how you feel about that. You know, do you think we will get, you know, a finish in this one? Let me know what you think. For me, I just think you're better off just literally looking at how their previous fights played out and, you know, betting with the outcome that occurred 2 out of the 3 times, right? But let me know what you think. You might feel differently. In terms of prop bets on this one, shall we take a look? So, when Moreno finished Figueiredo, it was by submission, right? But it was basically because Figueiredo was too tired to defend himself. He just got worn down and submitted. In terms of props, you may want to think a little bit about Moreno picking up a win in the 3rd round, the 4th round, and also the 5th round. Purely because if he does come out the gate aggressive like he did in that 2nd fight, forces Figueiredo to fight at an unsustainable pace early, you know, forces Figueiredo to go to war in rounds 1 and 2. I do think we'll see Figueiredo gas in the second half of the fight, leading to Moreno getting a finish in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And the odds are very generous. You know, you could sprinkle a tiny little amount of money on, you know, finishes for Moreno in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And if either of those hits, you get a pretty nice return. I don't think it's that likely Figueiredo finishes Moreno. I will say this, if Figgy wins, I feel very, very confident that it will be by decision. So if you look at the odds on Figueiredo by decision, they're quite steep. I don't like those odds. I think you'd be better off just betting Figueiredo straight there. I don't love the odds of 3.50 plus 250. In terms of props for Moreno, I mean, if you really want some action on this fight, Moreno to win by knockout at TKO at 9.0 plus 800. It's not bad. Do I see Moreno knocking Figueiredo out on the feet? I don't think it's that likely. But if Moreno can get Figgy tired by making him work hard early, we could see a situation where Figueiredo just becomes too tired to defend himself, and Moreno's able to get a stoppage through ground and pound or follow-up shots after he does drop Figgy, if Figgy gets too tired to defend himself on the feet. I do think 9.0 plus 800 is quite generous, actually, considering the fact that Figueiredo does get very, very tired in fights. Does have a tendency to adrenaline dump. His cardio only held up really well in the third fight against Moreno, because Moreno just didn't make him work that hard early, but that could all change in this one. So yeah, that's how I see this one on moneyline, over-unders, prop bets. But it's a complex fight, a very, very interesting fight, and a fight that even for the fourth time, I can't wait to watch. When these two step in the octagon against one another, it is always fireworks. So let me know what you think in the comments below. How do you see this playing out? If you like these breakdown videos, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to come back and check this YouTube channel every day, where I'll be dropping a new breakdown video for UFC 283. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. But for now, take care. Have a great day. I'll see you all soon. Bye.